Now, as schools open for the 2017 academic year tomorrow, the South Africa Democratic Teachers Union will monitor the readiness of schools that obtained a 0% matric pass rate across the country. For more on this, we are now joined in studio by SADTU General Secretary Mugwena Maluleke. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening, and thank you for having us indeed.
Now, let's get straight into it. Can you briefly explain what these observations entail on these 0% matric pass rate schools?
What we're going to be doing as an organization is to really understand what are the courses where the school would really obtain a 0%. One is to find out whether the schools do have the teachers in terms of the learning areas that are there. Secondly is to find out whether the materials in terms of learning support materials, teaching support materials are delivered on time, but also is to establish on whether there is teaching and learning taking place, one in terms of the support that we are supposed to be receiving from the Department of Education, as well as the parental involvement in that particular area, but also to scan the area in terms of how the environment is it conducive? Are we having maybe shebeens closer to the school, the number of learners that are in that particular school? So these are the areas that we will then be observing, but also monitoring with the intention of assisting and supporting those particular schools to be able to really pass the children.
You've mentioned some of the issues that you'll be looking at and observing over time, but let's backtrack a little bit. It's not the first time that we've seen schools that obtain a 0% pass rate, and it would be fair to say that some of the issues have been identified before. Why do you think that it has taken so long for solutions, for government, for example, for the Department of Education to come up with solutions to curb such an issue?
I agree with you that this has been going on, but what we do, we adopt different strategies every year. For example, 2-3 years ago in Limpopo, what we did was to adopt those particular schools and push them to be able to perform, and indeed they have performed. But the circumstances are not the same because every year you receive different types of learners from the primary schools, but also our society is changing every time. Our children are more exposed to cell phones and everything that is happening. So we need to understand exactly why this type of school is receiving this type of results. They will not be the same. A school in the Eastern Cape may have some similarities with a school in Limpopo, but they will not be entirely the same. So we need to be every time revising our own strategies on how we address this. But this school this year can get 0%, and next year it goes to 70%. It depends on the number of teachers that are there, the number of subjects that are being chosen, and so forth. So we need to be able to understand those things.
Now, based on tomorrow's findings as SADTU, what are some of the measures that you're going to put in place to ensure that this problem is alleviated?
We think any problem needs to be resolved, and to resolve that you need to be informed. So as part of the Curtis Nkondo Institute of Training for SADTU, where we are training the managers, the teachers in terms of the curriculum and particular subjects, in particular mathematics, then we will then inform our strategies in terms of what courses are we going to be rolling out in 2017 for our teachers and our managers, but also what support are we going to give to the students, in particular our learners in grade 10 and so forth. But it will also inform our strategies on how we influence ECD and grade R and foundation phase, because the problem starts there.
Now, we had the spokesperson for the Department of Basic Education a little bit earlier on, and a topic that keeps coming up is the shortage of teachers in schools, because it's one thing to say learners are struggling, but if there's no one to teach them, there's really no way to expect them to pass. Now, the committee that's meant to determine the number of vacant teacher posts will only meet next week. Why only after the schools have opened? Is that just a logistical matter, or is there a reason why it's only meeting next week?
It's a systemic problem. It is that when we encourage everyone to register their children up to the end of September, is to inform the schools to be able to plan and put in place the necessary plans and strategies to ensure that come the first day of learning, there's teaching and learning. However, if there is going to be parents queuing on the first day of the schooling, obviously after 10 days is then that you can be able to determine the number of learners that are registered in that particular particular school because the school was not able to do that in time. We encourage that you cannot have 30th of November and you don't know how many teachers you need the following year. It's an abnormal kind of a situation because obviously it's a recipe for disaster. Performing schools and effective schools in communities, they finalize their admission in September and therefore they go to the department and say we need 6 teachers. So therefore you don't expect a committee to be meeting and say this is what will happen. We must not encourage that because what then happens to the 10 days until the committee meets? Then what happens after that 10 days? It's another 10 days. It's another 10 days before you get the appropriate qualified teacher to teach these particular learners.
I'm actually glad that you mentioned the issue of parents taking their time in terms of applying and not meeting deadlines. Would you say that parents take responsibility for those delays, or are they always looking to the schools, looking to government to make sure that things just happen?
Well, in our country, we have this problem of entitlement. We are always in government, this, government, that, and so forth. It's your child. The law says that the parents takes responsibility for his own or her child. So therefore, I don't take it. I don't buy the story that government must register my child. I have got to work hard to ensure that my child is registered.
Let's look at the everyday struggles. Nutrition, teacher support materials, and transport remain big challenges, especially in some of the rural areas that you mentioned. Would you say these are because of budget constraints? Then again, we've got the issue where money goes back to the Department of Education that isn't spent. Why are we still seeing things like that happen?
Enemy number one to that is lack of accountability, no consequences for the management that are supposed to be deploying these particular resources. Secondly, it is lack of efficiency in terms of how the money is allocated to our school and how it is being used. Because whilst, yes, we have got budgetary problems, but we think that the money is not being used where it's supposed to be used. When it comes to infrastructure, every year we have a problem of money being taken back to Treasury. I mean, it's not an excuse anyway in 22 years of our democracy that you still have lack of capacity in particular provinces like the Eastern Cape and Limpopo. I mean, it can't be an excuse in 22 years that you don't have capacity. What is the reason for that? Is it that people are still arguing about who must get the tender to build and therefore how I get my kickback? We cannot accept that.
Now, something that you mentioned earlier on was the situation at foundation phase. Let's look at the gaps between foundation phase, your higher primary level, high school, and then going into tertiary education. There are many gaps there. We've seen analysts look at it. We've seen universities coming and saying that we've got first-year students that come into the lecture room and they are just not ready. What's your take on that as SADTU?
Well, we have done a study as well where we were saying that whilst the education system would just want to push the children out of the system because of fiscal, the so-called fiscal discipline or fiscal consideration, that is not educationally sound, because what we are seeing is that we retain learners that are supposed to do a bachelor's degree for 3 years. They do it for 6 years because they were not ready. Now, the problem is that many of our children do not come from ECD. All right. So basically, many of our children don't come from ECD. So there's a difference between grade R and ECD. So where you ensure that children are ready for schooling is ECD, and that area has not been attended to. And the National Development Plan has made it very clear how we must address that. And if we are going to address that, then it's going to be an improvement. Secondly, is the issue of the development of language in the primary schools, because what you have to understand is that if you are being taught at 5th language level and you are doing 2nd language and you arrive at the university and the university is doing 1st language, clearly you're going to struggle, and that's where the gap is. We need to address the issue of language development.
How do we address the language issue?
We need reckless leadership from the politicians. A politician who says, I'm going to close my ears and eyes and I'm going to say these billions are going to develop mother tongue teaching. UNESCO has declared that mother tongue teaching is the best, and mother tongue teaching is the only solution for countries that has got multiple languages for teaching, so that you develop them, you are able to make sure that they are, they are very strong in terms of their analysis, they are very strong in terms of their own gathering and logic for mathematics and other things. But now, if they cannot access science, they cannot access mathematics in their own languages, they're going to be able to struggle. So we need reckless leadership. We just need money invest in this, make sure that the universities are forced to have foundation-based teachers, early childhood development teachers who are taught in their own mother tongue, so that we are able to address this particular problem. Reckless leadership, I mean, totally don't listen to other people. Just say this money is going to be used for this thing, and that's it. If Treasury refuses, you go there and toy as a minister alone, one person in front of the Minister of Treasury, and say, I'm not going to sleep until the children have this particular thing.
Very radical solution there. Now, tomorrow is the big day. It's the first day for the academic year for most of, well, for the public schools, definitely. Which areas will you be inspecting specifically?
Well, we have covered all the provinces, in particular the rural provinces. We have covered all of them, so that we have sent all our leaders to those particular provinces. But clearly we are going to be focusing more on those schools that have received 0% or 0 to 19%, because this is where our focus will be. So Limpopo is one of our critical area. Eastern Cape is one of our focal point as an organization, so that we are then able to assist and support those particular teachers.
Now, SADTU's mandate is broad, and just briefly before we wrap up, let's look at, in terms of this year, what would you like to see happening? Maybe one or two things that you'd like to see happening at the end of the year or at the beginning of the year when we get the matric results, where you say we have achieved 1, 2, 3 things, and going forward we can see, you know, there's light at the end of the tunnel, basically.
Yes, there must be light at the end of the tunnel, and our first point we would want to raise is that we want to see the NDP being implemented, especially the chapter on education. One is the ECD, we want it to be implemented. Secondly is teacher development. It cannot be that teacher development is going to be about saving. After savings, then we can have that. It's a core responsibility of government. We want to see teachers being employed in our schools, and no child must be in a classroom that has got no teacher.
Thank you very much for joining us. A very insightful discussion, and all the best with the inspections and going out throughout the country.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That was SADTU's General Secretary Mugwena Maluleke joining us live in studio for a brief discussion on what they will be doing as SADTU this year.